Okay, so as you can see, I haven't smashed my base up, so apologies for the overly dramatic thumbnail. Long-term viewers will understand the significance of the thumbnail. This is the base that I created to reproduce the base that Paul Simonon smashed on the cover of the Clash's London Calling album, and I just thought it would be fun to try and recreate the photo as well. And it is also true that I didn't break the guitar. The guitar has kind of broken itself. Now, I don't play a huge amount of bass, and this has spent the last couple of years mainly just sat on a rack doing nothing. However, when I picked it up a few weeks ago, I noticed that something was wrong. If I just play the open strings, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So the E string, pretty good. A string, nice. D string, horrible rattling. G string, fine. For some reason, this D string is fretting out at the first fret. So if we go up to the nut, we can have a look and see why. And hopefully this shot is good enough for you to see that it's fretting out because my nuts exploded. If I just loosen this string off, kind of get it out of the way, you can't really see too much, but the nut has actually snapped into two pieces, and that is why we are getting that fretting out. So if I just get the rest of these strings out of the way, you can see we actually have two bits of nut, not one. If I remember rightly, it's a kind of a cheap plastic one, so it's not any great loss. And what I will do is replace it with a nice bone one, which hopefully will be a little bit more robust. And luckily, it seems as if that's going to be quite a decent fit. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just get the strings off and out of the way. I'm not going to change the strings. They haven't really had that much use, and to be honest, bass strings always sound a little bit better when they're a little bit older. And I've just got some of these little Velcro tie wraps. Just to hold the strings, stop them from exploding everywhere. And with those out of the way, we can then start to kind of look at this and get this nut fitting. Now, as it stands, it looks like that nut is ever so slightly too thick. So the first thing we'll need to do is to thin this down a little bit with a little bit of sanding. And to do that, I've literally just got a piece of MDF, which I know will be nice and flat, and this is a 180 disc. And I'm just going to kind of very slowly work this down until it's a nice snug fit in that slot. Kind of getting close. It's in on the treble side, but it's still a little bit fat on the bass side. And that's it. That is an absolutely spot on fit. And to start the process of getting this down to the right size, we take our handy dandy little half pencil, and all this is a standard pencil, and I've glued it into a piece of wood with a slot in and used a hand plane to plane it down to half its thickness. And that means that we've got a piece of pencil lead that is running at exactly the same level as this, which we can ride along the frets, and that will give us a really good marker for how big our nut needs to be. And normally I have quite a sharp point on my pencils, but in this instance what I've done is left it quite thick so I get a good thick line on. Because if I trim down to the top of that line or near the top of that line, that will give me a really good measure of how thick I need this nut to be. Obviously I don't want to trim right the way down to that line because that represents the top of the frets, and if I cut the nut down to that, I wouldn't have anything to cut my slots into. So that's roughly down to size. It's a little bit tall maybe, but we can trim that down later on once we've got the nut slots established and in the right position and down to something near the right depth. So the next step is, I've actually glued the old one temporarily back together, and I'm just going to take a pencil and I'm going to eyeball the centre of the 4 slots in. So that I can now get this set up into my small vise, and then we can start to get the slots at least positioned. We won't do anything too drastic at the moment, we'll just get some starter slots in so we know what we're dealing with. And to do these, I've got some base nut slotting files. I think if I remember back when I did this first one, I just used kind of little rat tail files to get these slots down to where they needed to be. It wasn't ideal, but that was the only tools I've had. But I have since got some base nut slotting files, so I'm just going to size them off the original nut and just start working my way down. And at first all I'm doing is just making sure that I've got these slots kind of in the right place. I'm not going down very far at all. And I'm probably going to be doing quite a lot of checking as I go through, just to make sure that everything is in the right spot. And because this nut is very, very small, and I've no real kind of good way of clamping it, I'll now get it back to the guitar, put it in position, put the strings back on, and use 3 of those to hold it in place while I get the other nut slot down to where it needs to be. So just get those strings on and join you back in a second. Okay, so now we're getting into the real nitty-gritty of this, and that is to get these nut slots down to the correct height. Now, they need to be kind of quite accurate because there are issues that can occur if they're not right. At present, they are way too high, and that's going to give you a high action. It's going to make it difficult to play, and it'll also pull your guitar, or your bass in this instance, kind of out of tune and intonation because you're moving that string so far down, especially kind of up this end. It would be almost impossible to play. Now, the specification says that the distance between the top of the fret and the bottom of the string should be 22 thou. So I've got a 22 thou feeler gauge here, and as you can see, there's way too much room there. So my next step is to get the appropriate sized nut slotting file, take the string out of the slot, take the slot down until the distance between the fret and the string is kind of exactly the 22 thou that we want. If we take it too low, it will buzz, because the string is obviously shaking, and bass strings do shake quite a lot. So we need to make sure that this is fairly accurate. It's quite a long and involved process. So you need to take your time, you need to go back and you need to check on a regular basis. And when I do this, I'm going to go at a kind of a slight downwards angle, just to give that string we've actually got a long way to go down on this one. And this is one of those jobs where you can't go too mad at it. You don't want to be going too low, whatever you do, because that is a massive problem and it will probably scrap the nut. So you need to go steady. But what you tend to find is that you'll go for ages and be miles away. So you'll go just that little bit more, and before you know it, you've gone too far. I've still got quite a way to go on this one though. Getting there. That is very close now, so I'm going to be doing kind of very little cutting now. And checking on a much more regular basis. Okay, so that's the first one down, and as you can see there's tiny little bit of deflection between the string and the feeler gauge, but there's not much, and I think that's close enough to give a comfortable action. So we need to do exactly the same on the other three strings. There's quite a lot to go at here, so I'm probably not going to film it all. I might just do a quick fast forward through that. You might also see I've dropped some masking tape over the fretboard as well, because I slipped a couple of times and I don't want to kind of damage this if I can help it. So I'll crack on, I'll get the other three down to depth, and then we can go on the next step, which is kind of finishing this all off and making it all nice and smooth. Okay, and they're all kind of down where they need to be now. It's a nice kind of playable nut action. However, we're not quite there yet though, because there is still quite a lot of extra material on this nut. Ideally, we want about half of the string protruding from the top of it, just to reduce kind of friction in the nut and binding, etc., which can cause tuning stability issues. So what I'm going to do now is, and this isn't anywhere near as exact as the last operation we did, I'm just going to kind of put a line roughly where I want the nut to go on each string slot. We're kind of there on that one already. I'll take the strings off again because we need to do a lot of cleaning up on this bass before we put it back together and set it up finally. So I'll take the strings off again. We'll get the nut out, we'll get it trimmed down to size. We need to do an awful lot of cleaning up and rounding up and making it nice and smooth and comfortable, and then we can start to set everything back up again. and get this one back onto the rack where it belongs. And then to finish this off, I'm just going to give it a quick sand up. This is a 400 pad. Let's get it nice and clean. And just sand off any kind of sharp edges there might be on there. Now you can go absolutely mad with these and kind of sand them to very, very fine finishes and even polish them up with a Dremel or something like that. But in this instance, I'm just going to leave this pretty much as it is. So that's the nut sorted out, made, cut to depth, etc. I'm going to do a little bit of cleaning up on the rest of the guitar, and then we'll get this glued in, get the strings on, get it set up. And next, all I'm going to do is just a couple of tiny little dobs of super glue in there. Get that stuck in place, and we can get this strung up again. And there we have the whole thing back together with the nice new nut in place and everything. Everything seems to be working absolutely fine. I've been over, I've checked everything, and everything is kind of still falling well within where it needs to be in terms of setup. I've given it a quick clean and everything looks lovely. So this one can go back into the rack, ready to serve another day. Now I'd say making and fitting a new nut onto a bass or a guitar is kind of quite an advanced thing to be doing. It is something that can be got wrong very, very easily. So if you do need a nut sorting out and you're not sure how to do it yourself, I would suggest getting a luthier to have a look at it for you. And if we just play those kind of open strings like we did at the beginning, absolutely spot on. Sounds really good. And for me, this thing has always had kind of a really good P bass tone, so. Okay, and there it is, all done. Back up to full playing standard, and very, very happy with how that's come out. Hopefully you've enjoyed that and it's been useful. If so, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll be back in a couple of days' time with the next instalment from the Shed of Dreams. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye-bye.